healing the womb of women, healing the womb that gave us birth, understanding that not all people have wombs, but we are all born from the womb of the woman. So, just to start out, like this for me is a continuation of an exploration that's been going on for quite some time, my entire life. And I'm sure this is the case for many of you. And I say that because I feel already and I want the warmth of your support. You know, when we speak about the womb, we're speaking about love making, about meeting each other in a very deep way. If you think about it, when there is a full term birth, it's 9 months. So that's 9 months of being held. You know, if you're fortunate to have a full term birth. So, in making love in general, we need time to meet each other, to breathe together, to feel each other, to warm up to each other. Now, lovemaking is not displayed this way. We're not necessarily from a young age educated about our bodies and what lovemaking truly is, how to meet each other. So I want all of us to meet each other now in a moment of just breathing together, and feeling our bodies and descending out of the mind space and coming into our hearts and listening and feeling with our bodies. And this is kind of setting the stage for a platform that I'm relaunching called Conversations with Prajna. Essentially, what Prajna means is our deep knowing, and that deep knowing, the intelligence of our bodies, that resides within each of us, and for whatever reason has been discounted, suppressed, dominated over. So let's relax here. And I see that there are some people on the call. And I want to say that you're here. And I know that you're here because you care about this subject. And the subject is you. You're the subject. You're not the project or the product or the object. And this is something that in the body of women and also in men have become accustomed to be an object, a product, rather than the subject of your own experience. So, this platform, the voices of women speaking from embodied knowing, and men as well, all people who embody something that's very alive and very true and are very willing and able and eager to speak from this deep knowing and from their hearts and to connect us in the way of women, in the way of the womb. So this came about from many years ago. Well, maybe it was 5 years ago when I paused these conversations that were part of something I called the Women's Embodiment Journey, and it was a 6-month program where we met once a month on a long weekend and several times over Zoom throughout the month. And this was a 6-month period. And what I discovered throughout the years of running that course, that through a good deal of it, I was actually still kind of teaching or leading from what I had gathered and learned from more of a patriarchal spirituality that I also hadn't embodied myself. I hadn't really come into contact with my own womb. And this wasn't always the case. So, in order to kind of fill this out a little bit in the way of introduction, we need to go back to the beginning. We need to go back into our history before our history was put down on paper, before anything was written, when the bodies of women were still honored, when there were healers, wise women, teachers, leaders, egalitarian communities, cultures that didn't have walls, that didn't have guns, that didn't need protection, because the community lived in a way that honored the birthing process, honored the ways of women that were just quite natural. Nobody went hungry. Nobody was homeless. Everybody was welcome in the community. And this was before the patriarchy took off in all of our cultures, all throughout the world. And I'm going to give you as a reference an excellent book that is called The Chalice and the Blade by Riane Eisler. And you can see this wonderful image of part of a woman's body. Now, what she did, along with her colleagues, some who were anthropologists, and they went into certain areas in Europe and did these very deep digs, these excavations, and found the symbols of women that were used in these cultures, and it was their spirituality, whether they called that spirituality or not, I don't know. They didn't necessarily call themselves sages or healers, but they were, and they took care of everybody. And these communities didn't look anything at all like what we see today, especially in the Black Lives Matter movement. You know what we have been witnessing throughout all of time, which happens to people that don't look like the white man. So you know enough about that. But what I want to say is that all of these symbols of women's spirituality, of everything that they used for their healing rituals, for their birthing rituals, the midwives, that all of this was suppressed. And what began are the witch hunts. They called them witches, but these were our healers, our medicine women. And we know about many things that have happened, the different massacres, the burnings, the hangings. So much happened, and this is in our womb, it's in our history. We have knowledge now about epigenetics. So this is something that is still with us. It isn't as strong. And there are so many strong movements happening where the voices of women are being heard, the ways of women are being followed. In fact, I believe it was the Dalai Lama that said that the change that is beginning to happen in our world is led by women, and it will continue to be led by women, and women will be the change. And also Eckhart Tolle speaks of this and many others. So, and I want to say too that this isn't just female bodies, because there is this wisdom of the feminine principle in all of us, and that's the principle or the archetype of receptivity, of nourishment, of creativity, of holding, of giving birth. So if we look back at our history, and here's another good book for you, which is Midwives and Nurses. And this is an excellent account of how the medical profession took over the birthing process. So I feel like I need weeks to kind of download all the information that I have. So what I recognize is I can't do this by myself. So the way that these conversations are going to continue is I'm inviting the voices of embodied beings that are embodying their deep knowing, coming from all different walks of life. The black Black women, Black men, the LGBTQ community and the trans community, as well as people with differently abled bodies, to let all of us come forward and share our stories, the richness of our own personal experience that isn't necessarily learned from all of the different textbooks that we've collected throughout time. Oh, I just feel like there's so much. So I want to try to keep some focus here and thank you for your support. So let me go back to the course, the Women's Embodiment Journey. So, what I discovered was that I wasn't really speaking from my direct experience fully. To a certain degree, I was. And when this course was happening, it happened after giving birth to my own children. And my first child was born when I was 37, and she had a very natural home birth with a midwife. The midwife didn't almost make it in the door. My body knew what to do. She knew what to do. We knew how to birth together. And it was one of the most profound and amazing experiences of my life. But it was very, very natural. Very little assistance was needed. So there was a wisdom and an intelligence operating within me. Now, 2 years later, I was pregnant again with twins. And by the time I was 6 months pregnant, I was already much bigger than I was with my first child. Well, obviously, I was carrying twins. But what happened is, as I recount the story after many years of really needing to process this in a really deep way, because um, many things happened. And I wrote about this in my book called Edge of Grace. You can read that. But what happened is I had a backup plan with my midwife that if something were happening because I was 39, I would be prepared to go to a hospital. So she was out of town, and the assistant midwife was there. And I was having Braxton Hicks, basically, which is the imitation of labor. So my body was having contractions. I was having a little bit of spotting of blood and things like this. So she asked me to go get checked in at the hospital. And what happened at the hospital, the local hospital, is I re- re- relayed the experience of my first daughter being born in 2 hours. So rather than doing any examination or checks, the doctor that heard this said, if these babies are going to be born in 2 hours, we're not equipped to deal with it. And they made a decision right then to helicopter me to, a very large hospital in our area called Stanford. And that's like where the big doctors, that's the powers that be are there. And what happened when I was admitted into the hospital, I became their patient. And there was no leaving once I was admitted. No matter what this body said, it wasn't listened to. My midwife was not able to come into the room. They said, this is our domain, we're handling it. I was there for a weekend. Their sonogram machine where they take a film to take a look at what the size of the babies was not working on the weekend. And they said they would get a clearer picture on Monday. Well, they never did. And what happened is they made a decision because too much time had passed that it was time to go into the OR and that these babies needed to be born. They assumed that they were 2.5 pounds and that they could have a vaginal birth. That was what I wanted. But let me tell you that every time that they were not intervening with me, when they were just leaving me alone, that everything stopped. There was a resting in my body, and everything felt normal. Like what I felt is my body needed bed rest, just needed to go home and sleep, but they wouldn't let me leave. I mean, I can still feel this now. So I was really on my own. And in many ways, I feel like it was well, not only was it a hospital takeover, but in many ways, it was a hospital rape. And this was only 23 years ago. So I tell this story because imagine how many times throughout the history of the woman's body and her womb this has happened over and over and over and over again. And we carry this with us. So maybe even prior to becoming pregnant, the pregnancy may have happened through some kind of violation. All different ways in which women's bodies had been taken over and treated. So I made it into the hospital, which is a place that I had never been in my life. And I had always been very healthy, very much in my body. So this takeover happened. I had an so-called emergency C-section. The babies were taken out and they were about 1 pound each. They barely made it. And I was, handed to them. They were smaller than my hands. And then it was up to me to attend to them. So this is probably a pretty extreme situation, but maybe not. And what happened to me after that was I went into survival mode. It's just surviving with the life of these little tiny babies and figuring out how to take care of them. My first baby was able to nurse, so I was determined that these babies would be able to nurse. Somehow I really felt very strong in the intelligence in my body and their intelligence, that if my first child could do it, so could they, that there was something natural about nursing and holding and the need for that, the need to be held. So they had a very healthy attachment in that way, but not all babies have that. If you look into the history of slavery, like in other leaders of dominant cultures where they had concubines or different slaves were impregnated and then their babies were taken from them. And over and over again. So just a long history of a violation of the womb. So what happened with me is it was as if at that time I became completely cut off from my body, from the waist down. I didn't have any feeling. And I began just living in a different way, one that I just needed to navigate a world that I was not at all accustomed to. And I still navigate this world. And sometimes it gets easy, and sometimes it gets very complicated again. But in this embodiment journey, there was a wonderful woman that I invited in as a guest speaker, and some of you may know her, Marlise Cochera. And she's a good friend of mine, and she offers retreats called The Way of Women. So she offers a very embodied spirituality. So she came and spoke with us, and I knew Marlise already for a very long time, but it wasn't until I had gone through this experience with my twins that could I really hear and receive and get what she was speaking about the pleasure and the power in the yoni, in our pelvis, in the womb of women, and how much we have learned to distrust this. And something about that really sparked something in me. And what came along with that at the same time was an invitation from a friend of mine to go to the jungle and work with Shipibo women, Shipibo healers with ayahuasca. So I went. I mean, I had had experience with ayahuasca prior to then, but now with the Shipibo healers, who most are women. And in one of my first ceremonies with these particular women, I remember sitting in my place, and there were some men shamans as well. But I was sitting in my place, and the mariasa, the medicine, was lifting in my body. And prior to then, I had felt a lot of confusion in my mind and doubt because I had had a very strong spiritual practice. But most of my teachers had been men. And even though they had offered a very profound, non dual approach to spirituality, and I had a realization of that in the mind, in the expanse of the mind, and great openings in the heart. It didn't touch the base of the body. It didn't, enter into the gut, into the womb, into the belly. And so when I was sitting there in the beginning, I remember feeling these conflicting voices in my mind, asking, what are you doing here when you have these teachers and you have this realization? Like, why do you need to be? What else do you need? Isn't that enough? Isn't that liberation? And then the medicine got very strong, and it's in the dark, and I could see before me all of the teachers that I hold in very great esteem, and I still do. I have great respect for these teachings. And so there was Ramana Maharshi, and there was Nisargadatta Maharaj, and Anandamayi Ma was there as well. And then the pillars of Zen were all kind of around me. But they were in there in a kind of a structured way. And what happened is that there was this descending in my body, and I suddenly felt myself as a tree, and the womb of my body opened in a way that I don't believe it ever had before, and went right down through the base of my body, and roots extended out through the base, really deep, deep, deep in the earth. And I felt myself there as in this womb of the mother. Just, it was dark and empty, and it was as if the space of all creation, like the womb is the space of all creation. Everything blooms, arises from here. The feminine, the masculine, some people would call this the void, but it was like dark and empty. And it was a long period, I don't know how much time, but just anchoring and rooting in these roots. And I use this image as my logo, because ayahuasca gave it to me. And she showed me this myself as headless, that the concepts in the mind are not the teaching at all, they're the pointers. So I could see that all of these representations around me, these different teachers that that influenced me in many ways, were there as pointers, and there was no conflict whatsoever between these pointers, but we're also pointing to something much deeper in the body. To really fully embody these teachings is to enter the womb. And this is where the greatest healing takes place for our historical womb, the womb of women, the place in which we are all birthed, and where we find and discover memories and experiences that have been passed forward to us through the witch hunts, through the suppression of women, through the rape of women, through the medical industry being taken over, the birthing process being taken over, the midwives being taken over, children being taken from their mothers. all of that, the healing happens here in the womb. This is where the wisdom, this is where the nourishment, this is where the holding happens. And it's an incredible kind of download that comes to me quite often now. And these roots that anchor us and connect us to the womb of the earth. And another part of that is this Mother Earth that is calling us back to her, is another part of the disconnect. Because the way of the womb, the healing of the womb, the way of woman, is how we reconnect to nature, to all beings. And there has been, as we know, this great disconnect where the earth has been treated as something that isn't alive, that something that we're to be in reciprocity with, something that we honor, just like our bodies, we honor and we give our offerings to, not something that we consume. So she's calling us it back also at the same time. It's not different, into right relationship with her, with the earth. And with birthing being taken over, with the wisdom of women being suppressed, with the healing power of women not being readily accessible to us, it's coming forward. And with the oh, what's the other thing? Oh, the birthing process. That is what is one of the root causes of the disconnect with nature. So I want to, before I forget, also offer another book, which is written by an indigenous man. It's called The Time of the Black Jaguar. And he speaks in here so beautifully about reciprocity with the earth and how the indigenous people, many indigenous people, have not lost this connection and really truly understand how to be in right relationship with our great mother. So all of this is available to us now. And what happened at the after I went home from being in the jungle for quite some time is it just like blew me away, is I was looking at my body and feeling the energy and the power and the pleasure in my body that I don't remember when the last time was that I felt that. Is that ayahuasca did this tremendous healing that reconnected me to my womb, healed the womb, and even took away the scar. I had a really strong, deep scar. It's just gone, just gone. So there's many things in that story that I can't really fill out all of it right now, but you know, plant medicine has another role in teaching us how to be in our bodies, reconnect to the wisdom in our hearts and in our bodies and in our wombs, how to love ourselves and care for ourselves and care for each other and return to this unified, connected way of being that was very natural to us at one time. And because it was natural at one time, it means it's still natural to us now. We just need to return and remember. So, our practices, it's important for them to be very embodied and for us to um, allow these stories to come forward so that the memories that are held in our bodies can heal, so that the history of the womb can heal, can find rest, can be deeply nourished, and can birth in the way that we're meant to birth. And this is not just for us, this is for all bodies, not just for women, but for all bodies, for our girls, for our children, for our boys, and to rediscover again what lovemaking really means. Most of the boys and men are educated about sex 24/7. It's available on the internet, and we call this porn. This is where they get a lot of their education, and that has nothing to do with lovemaking. I'm not going to say there's anything, wrong with that. If that's what a person wants to do, that's what they do. But this is the education that is given. And girls learn from a very young age not to love themselves, or their bodies. And we have such judgment. And boys do too. And the amount of rape and sexual abuse that has happened and that continues to happen is astronomical. It's just off the charts. And I know these stories have been coming forward for quite some time. When I was in Boston University many years ago, I did my master's in, um, at that time, it was called pastoral psychology. It was like transpersonal psychology. And I did it on the abuse of power, on sexual abuse. And I wrote sacred dramas around this. And I would go into different chapels and different places of prayer, and also not hospitals, but prisons and homeless shelters for women. And I would teach and involve different people to participate in these sacred dramas. And part of this was an opportunity to come forward if you had been sexually violated. And it just never ceased to amaze me how many people would come forward. It was actually less people that didn't come forward than those that came forward. And it gave them an opportunity to put their name in a book, a sacred book, so that the name of the drama was "And Silence Secrets Turn to Lies, Secrets Shared Become Sacred Truths." So it was an opportunity to share a deep rooted secret that carries with it great shame, and to put it in a sacred book and to let that be honored so a healing could begin, and whoever that person is could begin to return to their sacredness, their holiness, could be whole in a wider community of love. And this continued for some time. And then um, another story that I wanted to share, and many more stories will get shared through the conversations that are coming forward, but there was an important one that had an impact on me. And I'm sure that it does for many young girls growing up. Is I believe all people have a resonance or an inclination to the holy, to the sacred, to nature. It's natural to us. It gets conditioned perhaps out of us or covered over. A disconnect happens for a variety of different reasons. Now, one way in which it happened with me was my resonance, my attraction to the mystery of the holy was the environment I grew in was Irish Catholic. So I was indoctrinated into the Catholic Church as a young girl. However, since I was in a female body, I was not able to participate in the Mass. And at that time, the Mass was still held in Latin. But I was so attracted to the mystery of the Mass and something that felt sacred and holy. But because of my gender as a female, I wasn't allowed to be an altar boy. You couldn't be an altar girl. So there's an example of how a little girl learns that she is not sacred. that she is not loved, that she is not welcome, that she does not belong here in a patriarchal culture or society. So she doesn't get an opportunity to speak about this to anyone because she's just supposed to accept it, and live that out. Well, many complications unfolded as a result of that, which came for me in the form of substance abuse, eating disorders, and also many distorted sexual experiences, and within even the Catholic Church. And this happens also, another part of that is men are initiated into the so called holy and able to perform mass, but also in their education and training, they're not given an opportunity to explore their bodies and their sexuality. So, in many of the patriarchal spiritual doctrines that have been passed down, there is a discounting of sexuality and of the body. So the girl is in the female body is conditioned a particular way, and that's very confusing and disconnecting and suppressing. But the man is also. So I say this because I want this program that's coming forward for everyone to feel that there is something in it that you could benefit from, that it's not a place to blame or shame or make anybody wrong in any way, but it's a place for us to come together and meet each other from our embodied knowing, what we know in our bodies, what we know in our bodies to be true. Now, I work with plant medicine quite often, and I get to meet and see people up very close. And it's always interesting to me, not only in the medicine field, but in my work in general, when I'll ask somebody what's happening in your body or what's going on. And there will be a repeating of, I don't know, I don't know, I don't know. And at a certain place in our development, being in a space of not knowing is a wonderful thing because we're in a time of transition and a deeper transformation is happening. So this is a wonderful space to be in when we're coming out of knowing what we know in our minds conceptually, and we're coming into the space of direct experience. We can go through a phase of not knowing, and that's we're entering into unknown places, and that's wonderful. But I'm not speaking about that. I'm speaking about the conditioning that happens for so many of us, where we don't allow ourselves to know what we know. And we learn almost like a knee jerk reflex that says, I don't know. And we discount what we know. We cover it over, we cover it over. And beneath that is a belief that I'm not important, that it doesn't matter. And these are the things that we want to uproot, we want to uncover, we want to unleash, and we want to get into what the body knows. All bodies, to really come into this place of prajna, of deep knowing and be able to give it a voice. And this is the other part of the ayahuasca journey that I had. So not only did she show me that, we can be headless without concepts and have these open hearts and these roots in the base of the body, but in that is the blossoming, is the blooming of a new way, of a new way of being in this life, together, unified, deeply connected, from our roots, all of our roots, that traverses the entire tapestry, the ground of the earth. And then we are able to attend to her, and she is able to attend to us. So we return to sacred reciprocity.